So we're recording and I really like to keep it casual, and relaxed. So we're just having a conversation for the first time. Hi everyone. I'm Abby and I'm here with Sarah and I can't really pronounce your last name properly to do you justice. Mondiani?
Mondaini.
Mondaini and
Yeah.
the inimitable Thomas Sheridan, who wrote this book, Hocus Focus. But I've been getting to know both Sarah and Thomas online and hopefully offline over the coming months because they're both incredible people. And Thomas was really kind to do a fabulous show with me and Mark Atwood with our book, Weapons of Mass Protection. So I thought I'd return the favor until I started reading Hocus Focus, and I thought, oh my God, I really have to talk to you guys about this book because it's just incredible. It really is. Um, I just want to introduce to my viewers who might not know who either Sarah or Thomas is. Sarah is an author, a filmmaker, and a blogger from Manchester. And coming from working class background, Sarah infuses her work with a blend of classic North of England no nonsense culture. I think that's why I like you. It's the time for the no nonsense people. Um, Through her occult philosophy and research, Sarah breathes a new understanding into topics ranging from paranormal investigation to personal growth, which we have to keep all eyes on you, I think. And Thomas, it's really funny, Thomas. Whenever I read your bio, it comes in my brain as pagan antichrist. It's pagan anarchist.
Yeah, but I
Thomas
can't even.
Sheridan is an author, alternative folklorist, filmmaker, and satirist who spent a life from Wall Street to the jungles of South Asia, attempting to discover the emerging and often elusive mythology of modern humans. I think you're a philosopher, you're a modern philosopher, working in these times, which is rare and very much valuable to many of us in these times. So I'm just so delighted to have you both on. And I wouldn't know where to start. Well, maybe start with a little bit about how you met each other and decided to work together on this particular topic. Would that be okay?
Yeah, Fine.
Uh,
I think I don't really remember, but Sarah probably has a better recall because I meet and deal with so many people. But I think we first met at the Mysterious Earth thing, though we'd been friends online before that, hadn't we? Yeah, we had been.
yeah.
Yeah,
We were friends online for a while before, and we met up at the Mysterious Earth, about 2022, I think it was, and hit it off, got on like a house on fire, had a few beers and a curry with everybody else. And yeah, and then about 3 months later, after Christmas, I thought, oh, I wonder if Thomas would like to do something along the paranormal Fortean road. And I was thinking about this, and I sent him a message, and I thought, well, he's either going to say yes or he's either going to tell me to bugger off. Well, it'd be one or the other, and none of it's going to hurt. So I sent him a message and asked him, and I was really surprised when he said, "Yeah, have you got any ideas for the title?" And I was like, "Wow, actually, no, not even got that far in the thinking of it. I just wanted to ask you if you fancied it." And as the weeks went on, then we started thinking of titles and concepts and ideas. And then we put the first one out in the new year, January, and the rest is history.
Yeah,
Wow.
I had been I'd been between shows, and I wanted to do a strictly Fortean-ish magazine show, and I didn't want to do it on my own. I needed help. So I wasn't going because that had been like the problem in the past. I was basically carrying the load in a lot of ways when I ever collaborate with people. And I just don't have the time anymore. I'm too busy in my life. Not that I don't mind. I do enjoy that, And I wasn't complaining about it. It's just I didn't physically have the time to do it anymore. And so when I met Sarah, I could see she was from a similar kind of background to me and a grafter. She would work. And that was the impression I got. So when she said that, I said, "Yeah, well, that's a woman who will actually do the work and help me, not just show up for the recordings." So that was basically it. So it was like it was a healthy working relationship. I think was we were both looking for that from the start, and it was just the timing was just right. If it had been 6 months earlier, it would have never happened, or 6 months later, I probably would have been off doing something else. So it was just you. The gods obviously got her to call me at the right time.
That's an interesting way of saying it. Yeah.
It's funny you should say that because on the day that the idea came into my head, it was a day when all the planets had aligned in the sky, and it was quite, everybody was waiting for it to have a look at it outside. And I'd gone to walk the dogs that evening and I saw the planets aligned there. And that's when the idea dropped into my head. And I thought, I've got to get these dogs back. I need to ask him this. And it was almost like something had moved me to ask him and just drop the shyness, drop the coyness, just ask or you don't get. So I did. It was a short dog walk that I came straight back in, fed the dogs, and jumped straight onto the computer and sent him a message and thought, well, he's either going to say yes or no, and he said yes. So here we
Yeah,
are.
and we both liked art and paintings and art history and a bit talking art and stuff, and that was a big kind of factor too as well to have that kind of connection.
I had to look that word up that you use, 14, and it's a person's name. I'm wondering why are you using that word? What and it seems to have a life of its own now because of you both using it. 14.
Well, no, it comes from 40 Times magazine, which is we were both fans of growing up. And Charles Fort was a kind of a fascinating character who existed at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. And he was the first kind of paranormal investigator who just said, basically, we don't know the answer to everything, but let's have a look and let's not go in. What makes Forteana different than paranormal investigation is there's always open ends. We don't know the answer completely. We don't. These things are mysterious, but we can't ignore them. We have to investigate them, but we can't say it's this, that, or the other because they're constantly changing, and they change. And in his book, he even said that the Book of the Damned, they seem to change with fashion. And it was a time, pardon me, I'm going to
Bless you.
plus laughter. You can take that out. But it was a time in history when the world was beginning to change. It was that period between 1888 and 1919 where you had the development of modern art, psychology, paranormal, the Jungian world, the Freudian world, this new way of looking at reality, and the growth of science fiction, as they call the scientific romances back then. So Forteana covers a huge field, but ultimately it's paranormal investigation with the proviso that, like, a lot of people that study the paranormal, they discover something. Oh, that's the answer. And then 6 weeks later, they see another YouTube video. Oh, that was wrong. This is the answer. Where a 14 is more along the case of this is an evolving experience that's happening alongside humanity.
Mm.
Let's keep an eye on it and see how it goes without actually saying it's this, that, or the other.
Yeah, I really like that because when I studied geology in college, they taught it to me as if it was a done deal. And these processes weren't actually currently happening now at the same time. All of this was in a book. It happened hundreds of years ago and it's never going to happen again. And I love how grounded both of you are with this. And, the book is full of information that's grounded. And I work with a lot of psychic intuitives. And I know when we get divinely inspired, as you were saying, Sarah, you had to run home with the dogs and you had to act on it immediately, that we get divinely inspired. There's a passion that comes along with that. And I think the way you have to temper the passion for it to come across in a grounded way when you're dealing with these stories. But has there been anything that both of you have worked on that has taken you out of that state, made you really excited or ungrounded, where you had to pull yourself back?
Well,
I
it's
would,
funny to say. I'm not going to say anything with Sarah. I know something happened to her the other night, but I don't know if she wants to talk about it on camera. But I think she was a bit nervous about it. But I told you, look, you're in the game now. This is what it is, and it's not going to harm you in 99.999% of cases. But if you don't want to go there, don't go there.
well, we can go there. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I had
Because this is your life now, woman. I'm trying to help you.
I mean, I've lived with spirit, ghosts, apparitions, poltergeist activity most of my life. So, yeah, it still shocks you when it happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's there and you live with it. But I had an experience the other night which just pushes me over the boundaries of being comfortable with it. And we'd done the show on UFOs and abduction phenomenon. And that very night, I'd gone to bed about, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up and there were two beings in the bedroom peeking behind the door, looking at me, and they came round and they come into full view. And the other one, which was the one that creeped me out, was either too cowardly or didn't want me to see him, and he looked over the other one's shoulder, looking at me, and they had long cloaks onto the floor, small heads, and they were bald. And this is the kicker, they were green.
They were green.
They were green and they were solid, yeah. And I sc looked, screamed, and I don't know if they disappeared or they went towards the window, but they faded away, and had to get up, go to the loo, ground myself,
Yeah,
went back to bed. An hour later, woke up again, and they're back. They were back again.
because you hadn't told them to go away.
No, but the second time I did actually say, oh, I did actually say, sake, they're back again, piss off. And they went,
You can swear. It's fine.
okay, okay.
Like, this is a good example of the difference between a paranormal or a psychic intuitive and a Fortean investigator. And that's why I wanted Sarah to tell this story, because it's important. The psychic intuitive person, or the sort of like, so what we call a spiritual person, might say these are beings from other dimensions who are contacting you, blah blah blah. These are the spirits of the dead. These are aliens. These, all those things could be true, but as a Fortean, you'll say it could also be that, but it could also be some kind of reaction generated by my psychology, caused by the show that we did the night before. And maybe not only, maybe I didn't open a portal, but I'm not saying you didn't, I'm just saying you could have, but maybe I opened it into the dimensional rift. That could have happened, but also it could be a projection caused by serotonin and melatonin levels in my brain that you corrected when you said feck off. They corrected that, caused a chemical change. So that's what a Fortean does. That's a very good example of how a Fortean does. They wouldn't run away going down to the priest saying, "Can I have a bottle of holy water?" or run down to the new age shop and buy, snow quartz that's been destroyed by mining. They would sit. They might. You can do that, and you should do that, because this ritual is important. But at the same time, to say, even if it was caused by a sleep disorder, like a sleep paralysis or something like that, and I triggered this through the intensity of the show, because the show was weird that night. It was different. We did an all audio show that was highly meditative and highly concentrative. And I have had numerous experiences doing my BON radio show, and people have told me things have happened in their own homes when it went down. I've had incredible experiences. Though there's something about just the spoken word. So it throws you into sort of an altered state of consciousness that maybe either opens up a portal or projects it from your subconscious mind. Your nervous system was imbalanced or something. And when you said feck off, or you throw a punch of salt at it, that may be getting them to go away. But it might also be that the serotonin or melatonin levels in your brain, or your oxytocin levels, have changed, and plump, it's gone. So that's what a Fortean does. A Fortean goes, it could be all of these things. Isn't it terribly interesting?
I was listening to your show, and that brings up a lot for me. And I'll come back to your show in a minute, because last night I was just going bananas reading your book, and I was, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then there's like a typical psychotherapist then thinking, well, I shouldn't really be reading this before I go to sleep. You know, so I was going into sleep and I was feeling dark energy around me. And just the way you were saying it, it could have been me eliciting it. It could have been something in the house that was attracted because I was open to it. So I did a lesser banishing ritual. And then I was able to go asleep, because I've been doing work like that before. And what was really interesting to me was that I haven't slept well in weeks. And last night I slept better than I slept all week. So I'm thinking maybe those rituals are something that I need to do every night, or every few nights, just to keep the house clean. So that was interesting to me for
Yeah,
that.
I wouldn't do it every night, because if it does involve, and I believe it's actually a mixture of all the things we've spoken about. I believe it's all those things. You don't want to acclimatize your serotonin or your melatonin levels to the fact where it doesn't work anymore. So you
Yeah.
have, I think, because I wrote 2 books on psychopathy, I read an awful lot into neurology, and the brain is a funny old thing. Lots of neurochemicals have limited amounts and things like that. So this is why you've got to be really careful with your brain. It's not like building a muscle up where it fills full of proteins and these things go in and build up the cellular structure. The brain's chemical neurology, nature has evolution has played a trick on us, but not by giving us finite amounts. So I wouldn't suggest doing it every night, but I do like the idea of a ritual, a regular ritual.
Well, it's interesting as well because that leads me into what I was going to say, which is you were talking about the alien stuff and the UFOs coming down, and you talked about a farmer who saw a golden egg-shaped UFO in a field late at night, and it was on a stand, and you were saying that that's what he saw. And it's not necessarily what was there because his brain was mapping onto what he saw, something that was familiar. And that reminds me of the story about how the ships were coming from a distance and nobody on the tribe on the beach could recognize what they were. But the shaman who didn't place things onto things could see the form coming and he was open to the idea of it. So he was saying there's something coming, and they didn't believe him until they were right on top of them. And I think if there was more of a knowing by people that we tend to map images of things that we're familiar with onto things that we're not familiar with.
Yeah. I had a very strange experience up near where you live, Abby, in the Dublin Mountains in 1981 with a friend of mine called David, who I was playing in a band with. And we were up there looking for magic mushrooms and we couldn't find them. And we were in the field with the sheep looking around. Now, you know the way you have that kind of, that place called Lookout Point? It's the back of Tallow where you can see the whole of Dublin and the bay and everything. And it's quite spectacular. And something happened to both of us. He said, Jesus, look. And we could see not only all of Dublin Bay, but also right across the Irish Sea. We could see all of Britain. We could see the ships in the sea. We could see Scotland in the distance. We could see the mountains of Mourne in crystal clarity. We could look over and see the mountains in the west of Ireland peeking up over the curvature of the earth. And we were just in a state of like, what are we seeing here? That's not possible. You cannot see these things this way. And it made me realize that perception is a very peculiar thing that you can, maybe we're affected by spores, or maybe we had a kind of fairy stray experience, but both of us witnessed it at the same time, that we witnessed the world, the immediate world around us, as if we were gods looking down on it, compacted into a visual area that was impossible unless you were way up in space. And yet it happened. And it happened like, and the two of us, and I can always remember the strange feeling we both had. And he died recently, and a few years ago I was talking to him, and the first thing I was out, he said, "Do you remember when we were kids, we were up in the mountains that time we saw the whole of Britain and Ireland?" And it affected him. Then he was a scientist, and affected him deeply for the rest of his life. So that was perception. Perception shifted somehow. So I think when people do have these fairy experiences or alien experiences, I do think they do put, like we said in the show, their own visualization on top of it, a way of dealing with the uncanny valley experience.
Mm.
I've had a time, speaking of perception, I've had a day where I lost 8 hours of time and I don't know where I went or what happened. It was midday and I was due to go out in the evening with friends at 8 o'clock that evening. And I sat down, it was midday, and I thought I'll just sit here. Or I don't know if I don't know what I was doing, reading a book, watching the TV, whatever it was. And next thing, I thought, have I fallen asleep? Oh well, it's about 4 o'clock. I must get up and start to get ready. So I got up off the sofa to get ready and looked at the clock through the window on the church that was there, and it was 8:30 in the evening. And for me, I thought it was about 4:30. Thought I'd nodded off, hadn't nodded off because I don't have any recollection of anything. Just nothing. Just 1 minute sat there saying, I'll just read this book, and then I'll think about doing what I've got to do, and then I'll get ready to go out. And the next thing, it was 8:30 at night. And there's no way on earth I would have fallen asleep at midday till 8:30 in the evening. It just wouldn't have happened.
So how did you make sense of it for yourself or process it even?
I didn't tell anyone. When people, my friends, it was before the days of mobile phones, so I couldn't contact anyone and say I'm not coming. I was just a no-show on that evening. And the following day, I phoned up friends at home and said, I'm really sorry about that. I wasn't feeling very well. But I didn't say I disappeared for 8 hours and I don't know where I went. I don't know where my conscious went. So I just kind of didn't tell anyone and just put it to the back of my mind, but it's always been there. And even to this day, still don't know where my consciousness went or where I went or what happened.
See, the clock speed of the human brain is an arbitrary process that we kind of all agree upon because there is no baseline clock speed to the human brain. There isn't thing that tick. There's no part of our brains that tick by in hours and seconds and minutes. There are casual associations that we do by things like seasonal changes, or the sun rising and falling with the cycles of the moon and the sun and so on. But in terms of the quantifying of that into specific periods of times, i.e., that, right? This is completely arbitrary. It's something that you and I and everyone else agrees upon. But if we lived in a sort of a world of free association, our experience of time would be completely different.
Yeah, it's unusual. It's like detective cases, and most of them are open and unsolved. Each
Mm.
one of them. Although it springs to mind is my dog, who seems to know it's 7 o'clock every day just by his tummy being hungry. He's still got jet lag from the clocks changing. So
I always say, if you want to know the time of the day, get a cat because they'll remind you when it's time to eat.
they will. They
And
will. You've said some incredibly stimulating sentences here in this book, some of which have I'm like driven me bananas because I totally agree with you. And it's like the consensus reality in scientists who are closed-minded and don't want to listen to anything. But something here about H.P. Lovecraft I thought would be really interesting to talk about. Um, where he's wondering if his dreaming. So he wrote HQ. For those who don't know, he's H.P. Lovecraft has written tons of books, and a lot of it is stepping out of the normal day-to-day paradigm. I think it's probably the basis for huge inspiration for things like Doctor Who and Douglas Adams, and a lot of horror is based on his books. But he was wondering if his dreaming and writing was allowing him to peer into different dimensions where the worlds that he created were actually real, cosmic, and interdimensional. And it reminded me of something that I had read about William Shakespeare, and I don't remember where it was, but it was a conversation, and he's saying something to the tune of, well, maybe I'm just writing histories of things that already happened in a different world, on a different planet, in a different dimension, because they come so quickly. How did you write so many stories? And it's, to me, it's just really interesting because it's like the bleeding in of the myths and the legends into our reality. How do you
yeah,
feel about that?
yeah. I mean, the quote by Lovecraft was, these phantoms of my nocturnal slumbers. Do I have a really? It was he wrote 40,000 letters to friends and colleagues in his life, so we have a vast canon of insight into the man's, and these were volumes and letters themselves, and we have a vast insight into the man's, thinking. And he was at one point he was thinking, because he was being tortured by these creatures called night cunts that he called them as a little boy that used to tear his stomach apart in his sleep. And he wondered if these things that he saw in his dreams, all his mythical creatures that became his mythos, that he was he actually plagiarizing or was he really inventing them? Was he actually seeing them in another reality? And and he seemed to be quite tortured by the concept. If this is why he didn't seem to be particularly bothered that he was impoverished. He never made any money from his writing. But ironically, Mozart said exactly the same thing. He said that like the songs already exist out there, they just have to be extracted from the the ether or whatever, the music. And Michelangelo said something very similar regarding stone. The statues are in there. I just have to uncover them. So I think, yeah, well, I mean, this is a huge topic. Who is the dreamer and who is the dream? And I don't. I let Sarah take over. My impression, my strong feeling at this point is that the dream world is another version of reality that we go into, and we have two sides of us. We have the daytime, this cognition, waking that we're experiencing right now, and when you go into the dream world, you're actually literally going into another reality, another version of reality, and another space-time continuum. And I truly, truly believe that at this point because so many things have happened. I've had so many prophetic dreams, but I'll let Sarah jump in there because I think she knows a bit more about that stuff than I do.
I totally agree that we do. There's a dream world that we can tap into and that we go visit when we're asleep. We probably do a lot of good work when we're sleeping in regards to what we create and bring down into the physical when we're awake. And I don't know about yourself or Thomas, but I think we can also put a foot in that world when we're in water, when we're in the shower or when we're in the bath, because for me, I have some of my biggest ideas or for art or for writing about or for topics for the show when I'm actually in the shower. It's almost like I'm in the
Mhm.
shower, um, but I my consciousness is just outside of me, and it's bringing something in, and then I'll have a fantastic idea, and I'll think, what, where did that come from? So I think, yes, there's definitely the dream world and the real world. And I think if you want to experience it slightly while you're still awake, get into some water and just drift off into an alpha state and the ideas that come through.
It's
I've
amazing.
I've known women who had crystal clear, clairvoyant visions in the shower and came out and told me, I just had a vision that this happened, and then 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, we discovered it happened. So water seems to make women. I've never had. I don't know. I've never. I know it sounds sexist, but I've never met a fella who had it. I've never had it, but I do have great ideas. But the prophecy thing seems to be very integral to women. Maybe it has to come with birthing and the fluids and around. I don't know. Women are closer to mermaids or waters. Maybe that's what the mermaid allegory really is. The concept of prophecy. But absolutely, I've known quite a few women who've had prophetic experiences in the shower that were bang on. They weren't even like vague.
Yeah, I've always felt that men were afraid of women for reasons like that, that they have more access to psychic abilities maybe than the men, or can draw down more power. But there is an equal balance. That's why your show is so good to have that, held by the masculine and the feminine. Actually, while we were talking, I was thinking of that movie yesterday where he gets struck by lightning or hit by a bus and goes into a parallel dimension where the Beatles songs don't exist. And so he creates them and then takes the credit for them. But I mean, but things like I was watching Game of Thrones and the dragons coming up, and I feel all this emotion, and it's like, didn't we have dragons once? There's got to have been dragons here, but it's possible that maybe in another dimension or in another dreamscape, there are dragons, and that I'm closely connected with them over there. And there's a bleed over between them. It's I like the way that we're not saying this is what it is, because we can't possibly say that anything is anything else.
Well, what about people who have, okay, this we could be going into reincarnation here, but people have a fascination or a knowledge of other cultures that they have absolutely no connection to. I find that amazing. That they suddenly will come from a culture and then suddenly have a fascination in a completely different culture and we have such a familiarity with it that they are almost part of it. Like, is a person from England might actually be Japanese in their sleeping hours, this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, my daughter, she's 14 and she's doing Korean, and she's always loved Korean, and she's doing Asian cookery. And her dream is to be fluent in Korean and take us all over there and then order dinner in fluent Korean for everybody to do it. But there's nobody in my family has any connections to Korea at all. So, it's very interesting that way.
I think a lot of fears and phobias are also past life related as well. I truly believe that. For myself, when I was a young child, I had a very bad fear of thunder and lightning. Not so much the lightning, but the noise of the thunder would send me into absolute hysterics under the table or under the covers to the point where I don't know, I was hysterical. And I honestly believe that I had a past life where I was bombed and killed by a bomb. And I think that that is why I had, as a young child, that fear of the noise of thunder. Whereas now I absolutely adore thunder and lightning. I love storms. But when I was a child, I had an irrational fear that that used to terrorize me. So I think it was a remnant of a past life of being killed by a bomb.
Yeah. Well, my husband, when he was a child, used to have nightmares about being bombed in an airplane and crashing in an airplane, and he would never have been in an airplane when he was that small. So,
Yeah, and we have to understand, I think, because we're back to the clock speed of the human brain, that our dreaming world and our past lives may be always happening at the same time. We have this concept of concurrent thing that we've adopted kind of from Eastern philosophy, but if you actually dive into Eastern philosophy, it doesn't say that at all. That's kind of like, the hippies in the 60s, one of my pet peeves. The hippies in the 60s ruined so much, but they have this thing, you die in this life, and the next life you're born again. No, there seems to be it happens at the same time. And this is, if you look, reincarnation is the universal afterlife experience outside the Christian Abrahamic world. It's the universal experience everywhere, but it's quite common that you're at the same time. But even if you look at like pagan Judaism, they believed in it as well. It happened at the same time. So you not necessarily are going to be born in the next life in the year 2070. You'll be born probably in a previous life because there's no clock speed. You see, everything in the universe is happening at the same instant in this moment. It's only our brains and our nervous systems are quantified so we don't go crazy. It's quantified, but it's happening at everything is happening in a quantum fraction at the same moment. But the nervous system that we have quantifies it into understandable portions.
absolutely. And it also feels that the progress is linear when it isn't necessarily linear. For example, I've been doing work with people. I think I was giving a talk or something, and I was just talking free flow, where it came through that the life you're living now might not be your most enlightened life. And you could have had your most enlightened life at a much earlier historical era. And people were like, but how could that be true?
Yeah.
Because we could pop in and out of timelines.
Yeah,
It's
that's how divination, I think, works, and that's why they wanted to ban divination because it was the greatest inhibitor to the linear timeline. The fact is, like, how did you know this was going to happen tomorrow? Well, because I was there tomorrow. I was there tomorrow and I saw it. And I'm showing it in the cards because my subconscious mind is older than words and language. It operates in symbols. So the cards told me what was going to happen tomorrow. It's so that was, but then there's been great efforts made through history to maintain the linear thing. If it's almost like if there's a war between good and evil, the evil side are obsessed with keeping us linear, and this is why they're
Mm.
obsessed with calendars and clocks and time, and that's almost like their spiritual bondage into this reality.
I think so. And keeping us really attached to things that are meaningless, like dates and numbers and age and bodies and identity. So I said to my husband after reading something in your book, how would you feel if it was actually 1724 this year and not 2024? And it's a shock. It's like, oh my God, how can that be a thing?
Oh, that's the part in the book about the Russians who discovered that the Western calendars were all wrong. Oh, that is an enormous taboo. If you want to get attacked online, you start bringing that one up, and that usually tells me that's probably true. But yeah, so we go into detail in the book, but yeah, basically these Russian scientists quantified the lunar eclipses, solar eclipses within the historic record compared to actual historic, because they could actually backdate them through time using astronomical calendars, and they said, "Holy shit, the Middle Ages never happened. They're lying. They don't line up." And there's only one book or something that actually claims that Charlemagne exists and is locked in the Vatican Library. And
Yes.
yeah, so yeah, so that's a real mass. You want to get attacked online by the rational types. Bring up the missing history thing.
I think we're going to be uncovering more and more things like that though as time goes on, as people are no longer believing everything they've been fed, because we've been told so many things, and it's that thing where they keep telling you over and over again, then it becomes real, you know, where it
Absolutely.
isn't.
Sure, parents do that to their children. So you even think of like say how a parent is controlling their child, or even a spouse who's gaslighting their partner. They can actually change reality by saying, "No, Do you remember when this happened? No, I don't. Ah, it did. And then they can make up a story, and the next thing you know, they believe it. Well, that's been done to all of us on a societal and cultural level.
I think wasn't that the basis of some of Freud's work, which is when you're remembering something, then automatically it becomes a fantasy because you're not going to remember it the way that it was, and then every time you remember it again, it changes. And ironically, a lot of his works were actually fiction, and he made up a lot of it himself, which has been the basis for so many things to be put on top. It's my dad used to say something to me, which is what I base my life on, and I am so grateful to him for doing this. I think I was 7, so it happened before I had fixed ideas about the world. And he basically said, "What if God made the world right now, a second ago, with your memory intact? You can't prove that he didn't. So you can't take anything for granted." So it made me unattach myself from everything.
That's fine wisdom there. I want to remember that one.
Yeah, because I used to do it with my children then, and I trying to get them to prove it. And it's like, prove that you're not 2 minutes old, and every single thing you can't, you just can't do it. So it brings us back to all of these different beliefs, and I think we do have a need to make sense of our world, but there's so much in our world that doesn't make sense. I'm going to bring it back to the book for a minute because you have so many examples in here, and I highly, highly recommend anybody watching this, or everybody should get this. I'll put links below where you'd like people to buy it. But out of all the stories in here, what's the one that's that's the one that you're most fascinated with?
I think Sarah, I think we both agree is the deep town concept, the concept that the land that we're living in is a repository of these forces. So that's really Sarah introduced me to. Well, I was tinkering in that world, but Sarah really brought it deeply home to me. And most of the section of that book is her writing on that. But that to me, from being co-authoring that book, that left a profound, enormous impression on me. What that this world that Sarah had brought me into.
Yeah, because I live just outside of Manchester, but we have lots of hills and countryside around us. The hinterlands are surrounding us with the Pennine Hills. And I live in a place where we've had two notorious serial killers from the same area. Um, so we've had the Moors murderers and Dr. Harold Shipman. So both were literally neighbours from where I am. And the question that me and Thomas were interested in is why? What's attracted those people to the small town that I live in? And then when you open that up and you see that there's lots of small towns and mill towns that are surrounded by these hinterlands that have a darkness to them. And why is that? Is there something up on the hinterlands, psychically or energetically, that washes in and leaves a trail behind it that is like a beacon to these dark types of people, psychopaths, narcissists, those kinds of people? So it attracts them to the area. Or is it because the lands or these small towns are built on areas that have violated some kind of natural law, or or the gods from the ancient world, from the ancient lands? Is it on sacred land that we don't know about? So these small mill towns all over the world seem to attract or have a darkness to them that attracts a certain type of personality. So we looked into why is that?
That reminds me of some of the concepts that Stephen King would write about, like a town that's built on top of a buried spaceship, and then suddenly the spaceship activates and all the people in the town start going crazy. Is it specifically towns with mills?
Seems to be in my part of the world, yes. Now, that because during the time of the Industrial Revolution, lots of people were outdoor dwellers and they worked on the farms and they worked with the seasons. And then all of a sudden, we got the Industrial Revolution. A lot of the farms were closed down and a lot of mills opened up. So
Hmm.
working outside, you're then plunged into factory life where you're inside and you're watching the clock and you're doing the same monotonous job every day of the week. And then you go home and then you repeat it the following day. And I think the change from being mainly rural to being flung into a mill or a factory can also have a psychic effect on your family and your home life, and it can cause stress, and then all that can cause activity, nasty poltergeist, ghosts. All we go into all kinds of things where if there's stress at home, it can cause activity within the house, within the area. And I think the layer upon layer upon layer of that over the years from the Industrial Revolution to now, just like what Thomas mentioned earlier before we started recording about his wall there when he stripped back the wall. We knock things down, we build over with a new housing estate, but all the psychic energy is still there underneath and it's bubbling and waiting to come to the surface. And eventually there might be an incident or a person that's attracted to that and will move to that area and that bubbles over. And then we find ourselves where we've got a serial killer living in the community, or there's a darkness there, it doesn't feel good, or it's a town where there's a lot of paranormal activity going on. And then a little bit further down the line, those houses get knocked down in the name of moving forward. And then some more houses, more modern, is built on top of it. And you've got another layer again. And it just keeps happening over and over and over. So the more it happens, the more layers and strata that you have. And then the more darkness seems to gather and the more paranormal activity there are in these small towns.
There's a strong Jungian element to this as well, that like when these were agrarian societies, farms and this that like the type of thing, people living in the countryside, they had their own folklore. And this is out in the book where they had like giant dogs or grey ladies or ghosts or fairies commonly in Ireland. And then these areas became urbanized, and this is a very important thing from a Fortean aspect of view point of view, in that these folkloric tales about banshees or whatever, headless horsemen, they grounded the rural community in the kind of a Grimm's fairy tale compensation of the reality that they lived in, that there was light and shadow and this kind of thing. So you move into, then they build these suburbs on these former towns, rural communities, and there's no new folklore. So you have this kind of volcanic Jungian eruption where the darkness will come to the surface. And this is why the serial killers and all the other types like Maura Hindley and these types of people move in. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think what you said there, Abby, about Stephen King, I mean, the one scene from the old, and this is why things like films, folk horror plays a huge part in what we do at Hocus Focus and in the book, both the show and the book, is that they're kind of like reverberations of the psychic kind of paradigm that these cultures exist in. And there's that famous scene in the Stephen King Salem's Lot with David Soul version, where he says to his former boss, he says about the Marsden house, he says, "Do you actually believe that the building is evil in its foundations, in its bricks, in its walls, its paint, that it actually attracts evil men?" And I think that's a very plausible thing. And if you have a shiny new housing estate, and we all hear about horrors in suburbia. Suburbia seems to be a place of unique kind of horrors behind you look at Cromwell Street. Well, it wasn't so much suburban with, the Fred and Rosemary West and all this, but behind it all, like even the way he was burying those girls under the patio, it was almost like the sort of like pathological demonic version of DIY, gardener's world kind of thing. That these forces, if they're not if we don't have this sort of folkloric grounding, we will generate, or when I say we, I mean in the collective, the community will generate these things to compensate for it and create these darknesses that become a kind of a vacuum on which these dark spiritual forces fall into. I had a friend when I first went to America. I was starting out. I was painting houses, and my boss, who was quite I became mates with, drove me around this neighborhood and in Queens, and he says you would not believe all the lunatics who've lived on this street. And he says that guy there was a murderer. You one over there, she shot her husband. That's where he was shot himself. That's where I was shot when I was in a gang. That guy did, and he says, and his expression was, I'll never forget that. He goes, I don't know what happened in this town, but a spaceship must have flown over at some point. And that's funny. That brings us back to what you said, Abby. Yeah, I think these forces will come in there. And I think this is one of the great problems with modern humans is that because we do not acknowledge a folkloric, otherworldly element to our existence, that we're going, these things are going to happen anyway. And that's what happens in these towns. And this is why they become dysfunctional.
I think you're absolutely right. And if we look at society today just for a minute and to see how disempowering it is to the normal human being, where they're telling you you're one of many, you don't have any power, you have to do what you're told. When in a matter of fact, many people do have a lot of power that they don't know how to use. And something Sarah said, you work in the land, you work in the field. What are you doing? You're putting your power in and you're physically expending your energy, but then it's replaced by a factory and the heavy labor is being done by a machine. So you have all of this energy that's not being used. And my sense is that if you're being told constantly that you're not powerful, it's like your power can split off from you and go off and do something else, psychic power connecting in. And then it's possible that there's some kind of a magnetic field that draws in the darkness into these smaller towns that has a propensity for these dark energies. So it could be a psychic phenomenon powered by human beings and nothing demonic necessarily about it at all, because I do believe that we're so much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. What do you think about that?
Well, I wrote a part in the book about a housing estate not too far from me. It's been demolished now, but it had a famous poltergeist case there. Had a couple of cases. It was quite rife with poltergeist activity, this council estate. And it actually got televised and they made a documentary about it. And they brought in mediums and they brought in the Stockport ghost hunters. All kinds of people came in. Priests came in. The local housing came in to have a look at this. And when it was investigated a little bit further, it turned out that the houses that had the most poltergeist activity were the houses where there was evidence of or suspected domestic violence.
Hmm.
I can give you an example of that. I grew up in the Ballymun Flats. Now we were on the ground floor, which is like the first floor really. And there was houses at the back, and there was a famous poltergeist case of a family lived across the street. And I saw it from my own bedroom. I saw the doors flying like this by themselves. Now it turned out that that family, the father was a wonderful man, and he had like a seven daughters or something, and they were all from like teen little girls up to like early 20s. And he was otherwise a beautiful man. It was one of these things that also changed my mentality towards alcohol as well. When he would drink, he would become possessed by a demon. And he would stand out in the front yard screaming and shouting at the neighbors. But everyone forgave him because they knew that wasn't him. They knew that was he was being literally taken over by some kind of alcohol demon or something. I mean, that's what it seemed at the time. People just said, "Oh, the poor man, he can't handle his drink, and he doesn't mean anyone any harm, so just ignore him." But it had a terrible, profound effect on his younger daughters, and they were the ones I think eliciting the poltergeist activity through frustration, especially the younger teenage girls who need a daddy really badly. That daddy is really powerful archetypal figure to a teenage girl going through puberty. And so they don't, if you look at the Enfield poltergeist and stuff, this is the beauty of Forteana. It not only looks at the paranormal stuff, but also looks at the social, cultural, and psychological elements to give you a much more interesting way of looking at it. And yeah, and I think that was caused by that. So there definitely seems to be a link between domestic problems and honest to God, Sarah's right. I've seen it all my life. I've seen families where there were problems and there was ghosts and all kinds of things connected to it. So the psychic firewall, the spiritual firewall thing again. And again, I just want to say, you said it may not necessarily be demonic, Abby, but it can also be as well. Let's not
Yes.
get the impression that people think, oh, so demons don't actually exist. No, they do. Whatever they are, these forces do exist. So you've got to remember, you don't nail your colors to the mast until the mast is right in front of you, you know?
Well, I have a
Can I,
quote
can
from
I
a
just add
demon. I don't
something
know.
to that? Sorry,
Yes.
I just want to add something to Thomas's story, just to um it's something very similar. When I was younger, I lived in a block of flats, and from the ages of 4 to 9, 9 years, 4 years old to 9 years old, I lived in this block of flats, and our flats had poltergeist activity, a lot of it. It was off the scale. Now, at the time, and a good deal of growing up, I thought it was just our flat that had this poltergeist activity, but it turns out it wasn't. It was the whole block. There was 6 flats in this block, and my mum and dad had gone to the other people in the flats, and yes, they'd all been having um strange poltergeist activity. So it was the block. Now there was the flat that was opposite us on the top floor, and he said that he had no activity in his house. Now he was a middle-aged man, 40s, living unmarried, living at home with his elderly mother, never been married, never left home, no activity in that house. And it came to light not long afterwards that he was bullying his mother and knocking her about. He would beat her up. Now they had no activity in that house, but the rest of us did, and there was domestic violence going on in that house between a mother and son. The son was abusing the mother. So I believe that the poltergeist activity in our block of flats then was to do with what was going on in that house, because everybody else suffered from terrible ornaments flying, pictures flying off the wall, all kinds of things. But this guy said there was nothing. He thought we were all crazy.
That's really interesting. It could be a case where his psychological sensibility was allowing something in to act through him. And so all the poltergeist activity was through him,
Yeah.
as opposed to everyone else in the block who was a little bit more solidified. But what I was going to say there was a quote from a demon was probably written in a fictional book somewhere where the demon says, sure, humans do enough damage to themselves. We don't have to do very much to cause trouble. Humans do most of it anyway.
There's a short story by Isaac Bashevis Singer where he talks about a demon that lives in a drawer in a ghetto in Warsaw, and it's been through. It's actually it's actually Jewish, but it's now living among the Gentiles because all the Jews were exterminated or went to America or to England, and he's recounting the fact that he lives inside this drawer as a Jewish demon surrounded by Gentiles. But he talks about, and it's just like, oh my God, that's one of the most profound things I've ever read in my life, that the spiritual force of the past still remains, but trapped in the present where it's not really suitable. And so this is the beauty of which Sarah and I were trying to put across in the book and in the show, is that like when people are so quick to discount the paranormal, and you say, oh, it's just all superstition, oh, it's all nonsense and stuff. What they're discounting is a lexicon to understanding the reality of this world much more profoundly than many other things. Because uh, tell me your paranormal experiences, and I'll probably tell more about you than if you told me anything else. Because if you said to me, I don't believe it, I never had it. Well, I noticed an element of your personality you're shutting off then, and so this is the beauty of all this stuff, is that it's not standalone. When a woman is walking down the street one night and sees a UFO spaceship hovering right in front of her on the road, or she sees a werewolf, or she sees a headless horseman, that is just not a standalone thing by itself, but that is an element of a colossal dynamic that infuses the psychology, culture, the personality, the cognition, the spirituality all in one. And I think I mean, I feel sorry for people that are not Forteans I've even Sarah and I have even said this. We feel sorry for them because you're missing out on so much good stuff and interesting stuff in life. You're just saying, oh, it's nonsense, but it's not. It's incredibly useful.
It can be really beautiful too. I spent a lot of time going around Ireland, I would say 2016, 2017, with a friend of mine who really was connected into the land. And she taught me about thresholds and connecting into the energies of a sacred site. And you've written about that in your book too. I was really pleased to see that. And how you make yourself known before you enter the site and you enter with reverence. And the experience that you have when you do that is totally different if you just march in muddy boots and go, walk all over. It's like walking into your friend's house in muddy boots. And I particularly noticed this with the Hill of Tara, because when you go in the original entrance and you stop and you connect in and you say, I'm here and it's really lovely to be here and thank you for having me, then the energy, the feeling of the place is completely different. And it's so beautiful. And I was really heartened to see it in here. And I find it so interesting then that you talk about the ghost hunter type TV shows where they don't do that and they deliberately go in and mess everything up. And I think it's almost like they're trying to belittle the whole experience and to tell people, either this is too crazy for you or it isn't real and we're just taking the piss, to deliberately lock people out of thinking the way that you were saying, to have that richness of the life experience. It's phenomenal to me, really, how you can just be so shut off. But we've learned that over the last 4 years of people with cognitive dissonance just don't want to know, then they won't, no matter what you do. You need to have the poltergeist come and knock them out of the bed and throw some plates across the kitchen for them to believe that it's true. We're coming to the end of an hour already. Can you believe it? And this has just been great to get you both talking. Um, I don't know. I was just going to ask you to close. What would you say to somebody who wants to open their mind but is scared to do so? What kind of an advice would you give?
I would say, firstly, stop worrying what other people think because it doesn't matter what other people think. So don't be afraid to look at things from a different perspective because this is your journey, this is your life, this is your mind. And if you want to open it and look at things that are 40, and then the first thing you have to do is one, either not care what people think, and two, you just have to be immune or put on a second overcoat to ridicule because you are going to get ridiculed, but it means nothing and it says more about the other person than it says about you. So I would say put your big girl pants on or your big boy pants on and put your overcoat on and go and have a look down the Fortean rabbit hole because you won't be disappointed and life becomes colourful. And it's like when you can't see properly and then you get a new pair of glasses and you put the glasses on and all of a sudden everything's got angles and edges and dimensions and you think, wow, it doesn't look like I'm looking at life underwater anymore. I can see really clearly. So that would be my advice.
That's
Just follow
brilliant.
your heart and don't care what people think.
How about you, Thomas? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, maybe, just maybe, your psychiatrist, your therapist, your priest, your minister, your rabbi, and your scientist are all full of shit. Maybe.
Maybe. Maybe this has been so fun. Thank you so much for coming along. And you have a show, is you said your show is back on. Is it every weekend?
It's the first Sunday of every month. So
The
the next
first
one,
Sunday of every month.
yeah, the next one
Brilliant.
will be the 1st of December.
So we'll put all your links below so everyone can join in and please get the book. I'll show it to you one more time. It's kind of creepy. What's the name of this creature? It's a Lovecraft, isn't it? Or is it just an octopus? Cthulhu. Is that it? No.
Cthulhu.
Cthulhu.
Well,
Yeah,
no, I didn't. Well, we have to talk. The designer has to interject here, so it wasn't me. But I know where he was coming from. It was the Lovecraftian thing in with the kind of like was the tie the whole. This is why we make a big thing doing cosmic horror, folk horror, and paranormal. They're not in the independent, they're the same.
They are.
And the cover was to infuse that just where, and there is a passage in the section of the book about the bloop that maybe, just maybe, Cthulhu really does exist in that part of the Pacific, and it was actually been has actually been detected. And then we're in the world of chaos magic and all this other kind of other thing and manifestation. So it's like, why limit yourself to a dull life when you can have all the colors in the palette, Or as Sarah always says, all the toppings on the pizza.
Thank you.
Thank you.